Saturday afternoon, clearly they weren't in full pads, but what were some of the things that you noticed and made note of from that practice at Bryant-Denny Stadium Saturday afternoon?
Well, first of all, I'm going to step back to Friday, the first day, and you and I were both there and observing very closely in the opportunity that we had, which I know your listeners probably understand that it was, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. But, when we walked out and did that segment for your 5 o'clock show, your first question to me was what caught your attention, kind of like you just asked me there. And the thing that really struck me was just how well conditioned this team was, and we said that on that segment, that this team looked like, when you just looked at them when you walked in the gate, you said, hey, this team is really 1 to 85. They've put in a lot of work in that Scott Cochran program over this offseason, the summer. They looked really, really good. Now, again, that in and of itself certainly guarantees nothing. But it is good to see they've laid the foundation, obviously, Gary, with the work ethic that they've had. And I think that's one of the main things that really struck me. And again, like you said, it's always difficult to tell in shorts and those types of things because, it's not real football yet. But I would say this, and it maybe it's just more of a sense that you get, but watching from that press box perspective on Saturday and looking at the defense, and they seem to have a different step. They seem to have a different level of intensity in their step. They seem to be really moving quickly, well coached in that regard in terms of kind of confident, knowing what they're doing. I think that's something that last year you never sensed about the defense. And again, I know that it's real early. It's an early impression, but they just seem to be really moving fast to me.
I'm with you 100%. I think that's a great observation. And I think this entire team has a sense of urgency. We've talked about it all during the offseason, but now you're getting to see it on the practice field. And that includes Tua. Rodney, I got to visit with him Saturday at the media day with the players on the field, and he had such a good season. He came in as a freshman to win the national championship in the second half against Georgia, but last year was his first year as a starter at this level. And I know he was older than Jalen in terms of age, but 1 year as a starter. And I asked him about that, and he said, good, bad, big games, little games, you learn when you go through a season. I think he's going to be a more mature quarterback. I said this earlier, and follow me on that. I think he's a mature young man, but as a quarterback, I think there's a lot of things that he saw last year for the first time as a starter that is going to make him a better player this year. I know that it's probably the case for every quarterback, but I think with Tua, the expectations were so high that, you don't think about him being able to improve. And sometimes improvement is doing less, taking the check down, not trying to make the big play all the time. I think he'll be a much more mature player at that position this year. You agree?
No, I think you're certainly right because I was on Ryan Fowler's show the other day, maybe it was Friday, but said the same exact thing. I mean, what we fail to remember is that everything he saw last year was a first-time experience.
That's right.
And, so sometimes when you evaluate a player like that, you have to keep that in mind that, these guys are, and certainly in his position, he's still learning. He's seeing things that he's never seen before. And, I think that he learned a lot from the experience probably against Georgia, although he did have to battle through a very significant injury with what happened on the third play, but also I think that he probably gained a lot of valuable experience and things he could take positive from what happened, versus Clemson. Though, he had some pretty good numbers, he also had a couple of interceptions that proved very costly, but 22 of 34, nearly 300 yards, couple of touchdowns. But, those two interceptions can certainly, change the tone of the game. So I think those are the types of things that he's learned from, and hopefully, and again, I think it'll be interesting to see, Gary, just the things with Steve Sarkisian here now, how it all translates onto the field this season.
On defense, I want to get your your thoughts on Josh McMillan, because I've been thinking about this guy after listening to Pete Golding talk about him on Saturday. And I said this earlier, I don't think he's going to roll over and give one of these young guys, just give that position up. I think he's going to start in game one, Rodney. I'll tell you why. After listening to Golding and watching him go through the years as a backup, knowing there were a lot of people that said, hey, you're not good enough to play here, you ought to transfer. He's a fifth-year senior. He's hung in. He's tough-minded. Whether he'll, I think he'll start. He may not. But I admire a guy who didn't give up. And I think that kind of, just like we're talking about Tua being more mature on offense, I think that kind of maturity on your defense, that kind of, he's an engineering major. He's smart. He understands the defense. I think he's going to be a factor on this defense in 2019. What's your impression of Josh McMillan?
Well, I think right now when you look at it, inside they don't have, other than Dylan Moses, that experience and that leadership that even though Josh McMillan has not played much, he's played some, but he's been around all these years, and he understands what he's doing. He understands where he is supposed to be. And when you do that, you're actually, though you may not be as athletically gifted as someone else, but if they don't know where they're supposed to be, they get there a little later than you do. So I think that, because of his experience, he certainly is going to have a great opportunity this year in terms of playing. But I also think that his presence is going to help some of the younger players that have so much potential, whether it's Shane Lee, Christian Harris, Ali Cajo, Markel Benton, Jalen Moody. Just having a guy like him around Josh McMillan certainly I think is beneficial in so many ways, because he's been through it, and he hasn't really reaped a lot of the rewards in terms of the playing time and all of that, but he's endured and persevered to this point. So I think all of those things, his maturity, can really help these younger guys as they develop.
I think Raekwon's a key to this defense, Rodney. He's impressive physically. It's hard to say he looks better, but he does look better. I think he's trimmed down some. If you drew up a defensive lineman, you could probably just take his picture and build it off of that. He came back for a reason. I think this time last year he was anticipating having a big junior season going to the NFL. He watched Quinnen Williams blow up, and after 1 year as a starter, move on. He made what I think is a wise decision to come back, and I think that he is going to be a leader. I think in the past, maybe mentally, he would have some breakdowns. He would have some temper tantrums and cost his team. But I sense that Raekwon Davis is focused, and I think that's trouble for opposing offensive lines in the SEC. I think he's going to have a dominant season. What do you think?
Well, I think in the off season, the word I always got, this summer was that he had taken that next step. He had become a leader in that defensive line room and among the group there, and the things that they were doing, the workouts that they were doing, that Raekwon was now pushing people, now showing a lot of leadership. And I think that, he's matured over time and, certainly has all the tools, all the talent. We saw that very early in his career, was up and down a little bit last year. But I do think, too, that once again, and not pointing the finger at anyone, but saying that some of the defensive coaches, I think, and what they bring in terms of the intensity and discipline, including Brian Baker, the defensive line coach, especially because that's the room where Raekwon sits every day. That's very valuable. So I think on that side of the ball, it's Raekwon and taking that next step, but I also think it's being pushed. He's being pushed. He's being directed by, for example, Brian Baker on the defensive line. And I think that's really going to be a key for all of this defensive front, not just Raekwon, but all of them, because I think now with Brian Baker, they're certainly going to be getting a guy who is demanding their best.
This offensive line group, we're not sure exactly what it's going to look like, the starting five yet, but the number of guys that are big, impressive. Saban said he felt like this was the best conditioned team he's had coming out of summer. I certainly think, and this is saying something, this is a bold statement when you look at some of the guys that have played offensive line around here. I think it's the best looking group of offensive line I've seen on a single Alabama team since I've been following, Saban, and that started in 2007. I mean, as I said earlier, Rodney, if they can't find 5 guys that can play out of this bunch, that's on Kyle Flood and the offensive coaches, because that's a good-looking group of football players.
Yeah, it's good looking, and it's a mindset too. So I think that's where, they have to establish it and work it with these guys and get them, develop them into a unit and, cohesive. It's having that right mindset, And I think when you look at them physically, you're right. I mean, on the hoof, as I like to say, I think you can go across the board. Alex Leatherwood and Jedrick Wills at the tackles. And again, that's obviously those 2 guys were starters last year. Leatherwood moving from guard outside now. But you've got a lot of other players that really look good. Chris Owens at center in terms of, what he's done in the offseason. Emil Ekiyor is another guy competing at center and guard. The grad transfer from Florida State probably looks as good as anybody. Landon Dickerson. You've got Matt Womack back. Obviously, he's worked extremely hard. You've got, other younger players, Evan Neal, who I think has massive potential, and obviously he's a huge guy. I think, you just look at those guys, and there are some others that have been around a while. Scott Lashley, he certainly looks the part physically, and several others. But I just think when you look at that group right there, there's certainly not only they look good physically, but they certainly have the tools. Some of them have the experience. Now it's just a matter of developing them as a unit, because you've got to get all 5 of those guys. As you know, Gary, it's like all 5 of them playing together, and that was one of the keys about the 2012 offensive line. You had those guys who obviously they had some experience playing together, but you remember how good they were, and they were always consistent, it seemed like. And I think that, again, it was getting all 5 of those guys on the same page, and that's really what's going to be the key with this group.
No football team is perfect, and there are concerns. I've already had a caller ask me about tight end, and that is an area compared to these other positions where Alabama appears to be thin, particularly until Miller Forstall gets back out there. But Miller Forstall is a talented athlete and can help them in the passing game. I'm not sure in terms of the run game how good a blocker he is. I think he'll be improved. He's bigger than he's ever been. Having said that, and Saban was asked about it on Saturday, Sark was too. There's so many options with this team in terms of personnel packages because they have so many talented athletes. One of them that I think we'll see a lot of or see some of is 4 wides and 1 running back and the ability to play without a tight end when needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'd heard about that in the summer earlier too, that was something that they were really talking about strongly and certainly something that would be part of it. And when you've got those 4 receivers that they have, Jerry Jeudy, Ruggs, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, and then there's some other younger players that obviously are going to be pretty good too. But those 4 right there, those, that's probably, when you're just talking about personnel, that's your best. And, having them on the field together all at one time certainly would create some issues for the defenses. But, also, I will go back to the tight ends. This is a great opportunity. Look, Major Tennyson, he was heavily recruited for a reason, not only by Alabama, but by Texas, a lot of schools out there in the Big 12 area where he's from in the state of Texas. So he's certainly going to have an opportunity to step up. Cameron Latu, he's an interesting story. Came in as a pretty highly regarded outside linebacker, now switched over last spring after redshirting as a true freshman, switched over to tight end and has continued at tight end so far here in August. And you look at him, and athletically, he's extremely gifted. He's got nice hands. He's obviously still learning the position. But he's a guy that if he can kind of take that next step mentally and also, learn what it is to play physically tough as a tight end, then that's what he's got to do. If he can do that and combine the physical athleticism that he has, he's got a chance to really develop into an outstanding player. So, I'm not going to quite sell these tight ends, Tennyson with his potential, Latu with his potential, and some of the other guys. You mentioned Forstall. When he gets back as an H-back type, I think though he's not Herb Smith athletically, he's very tall. He's close to probably 6'5", and he has some athletic ability. But, Gary, I think he's really got a knack. He's always had a knack for finding a way to get open and catching the football. So I think he can be a valuable weapon in his own way as a receiver. Lastly,
Rod, another area of concern based on last year is the kicking game, both punting and place kicking. All the missed extra points last year. Skylar DeLong certainly had issues, and then Mike Bernier took over. They're both back. Bulovas flashed at times as the kicker. He's back. But then you get Will Reichert into the mix, and he seems like, and especially based on what people saw Saturday, that he is a threat to kick off, handle field goals and extra points, and punt. He is certainly going to make this kicking competition very interesting as a true freshman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I don't know that Nick Saban really likes to have the guy who's doing the place kicking handle the punting too. I don't think he likes to put all that on them, but, he might not really have, that might be his best solution to the situation this year, is probably the way to put it. But, I watched Will Reichert, and again, it was, Saturday, and it maybe not the kind of pressure we'll see, but I thought he got the ball off really quickly. Did not see him probably maybe he had 6 or 7 punts, and of all of those, I think maybe one wasn't necessarily a great punt, but I thought he got a lot of distance, a lot of height on every other kick. He was very impressive to me, and again, he got the ball off so quickly. Now, Skylar DeLong, I thought we saw him in the spring, and he really had an outstanding 8A game, and I watched him the other day. Maybe doesn't get the ball off quite as quickly as Reichert does. Got some good kicks off on Saturday, Gary, but he still had a couple that, there was that inconsistency. I noticed the inconsistency in him a little bit more than Reichert right now. And again, just one day, certainly can't make an overall judgment based on that. But I was very impressed, as you said, very, very impressed with Will Reichert.
All right, Rod. Plenty of information like this and much more available at TiderInsider.com.
Yes, TiderInsider.com. It's only $48 a year, Gary. All the premium information is there, but also the discussion on the forums going on right now about what kind of offense will Alabama run it more? How will they kind of approach that this year, and power running and all those types of things. A lot of good discussions going on right now on TiderInsider.com.
And, of course, much more discussion tomorrow night on Tider Insider TV at 6:30 on WVUA 23. Thanks, Rodney.
Sounds good. Take care, Gary.